Climate campaigner Ed Gemmell. Ed, look, I've got to start by saying a private jet to launch a climate policy is one of the most bonkers things I've seen.
I completely agree with you, and we don't always agree on everything, Patrick, but on that one, we totally do. Why on earth, if you were going to launch something that is environmentally friendly and driving us towards net zero, would you get on a private jet and go there? I mean, really, couldn't he see what was coming? It does worry me about his judgment generally.
Oh, really? Well, OK, so you're extending that out. You think that little mishap in itself...
I mean, it's just so obvious. If he doesn't get how obvious that was, is he going to get it on everything else either? I worry about that.
It's difficult to, I suppose, argue that there's a climate emergency while simultaneously... I mean, the line... So I spoke to a Labour front bencher earlier today who genuinely served this line up to me. He said, we had to use that because the Tories have ruined public transport so we couldn't get a train. I mean... So they're kind of almost lying about it as well, aren't they, I think?
I mean, you know, just absolutely ridiculous. And if it came down to it, I mean, after all, they could have driven up, somebody could have driven him, he could have worked in the back of the car or had a sleep and it would all been fine.
All right, now let's just have a bit of a chat about the actual content of what he was doing after he'd flown there, of course. So Great British Energy, we heard a bit about it there. Now, I've got some concerns about it. So Offshore Energies UK, which is the industry's body, has said... that Labour's plans could cost 42,000 jobs in the North Sea and apparently £26 billion in economic value. It is going to be funded largely through a windfall tax, but the big operators are already leaving the region, apparently, Shell, ExxonMobil. So it doesn't really seem to me that this is actually costed.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're looking at the costing of the whole thing, I mean, there was a report coming out about that, the 116 billion that was going to be spent on it. But in fact, the Conservatives anyway have an aim to get there in 2035. So there was going to be 104 billion spent by the Conservatives as well. So the gap isn't that big in terms of between the two parties and what we're trying to achieve. I do always worry when we go onto these ideas of losing lots of jobs and all that sort of thing. I mean, we are talking about an industry that's winding down. It's winding down, A, because we're going to net zero, but B, because there's less and less oil and gas to extract anyway. So that has got to be transitioned. You know, we've got to bite the bullet and get on with it anyway. We're effectively like a company that's running a production line that's losing us money. You know, we've got less sales going out than our costs, and then we're trying to extend the life of that production line, knowing the longer we do that, the less chance we're going to have to keep the company alive.
Yeah, I get that, but they're kind of promising people jobs on the never, isn't it? It's saying the green revolution will lead to a load of jobs. OK, but those 42,000 people they know what job they do now, they don't know what job they're going to do in the future.
Yeah, OK, so there's a communication issue, a strategy issue, and let's be honest, a plan issue. So what is the industrial plan? What's that overarching plan that's going to get you from one job to another? And that's what we aren't being given really by anybody in this coming general election. And I mean, Labour are more guilty of it when they're talking about GB Energy. They need to put it into context. If we can get ahead on net zero, if we can drive all those jobs and opportunity into this country, and GB Energy is just part of it, we can get ahead and have all of that stuff happening here. We have to be investing in the new things in a big way.
The question is, does the public need to invest in it? Is it the taxpayers? So when I look at some of this now, the Department for Energy and Net Zero estimated that there will be £100 billion worth of private investment put towards the UK's energy transition by 2030. The National Grid announced last week that it plans to invest 31 billion quid on the UK's transition. SSE is investing 18 billion over the next 5 years. Scottish Power as well announced plans to invest £12 billion. So that's private. Why do we need a small state-owned company at the taxpayer's expense?
Well, whether it's a small state-owned company or a large one, actually, to be honest with you, and whether that is the taxpayer's expense. I mean, that 8.3 billion, this is what they're saying, not necessarily what my policy would be. The Climate Party would do it very differently. But, I mean, in terms of what we're talking about, he's talking about 8.3 billion that he's going to get from windfall taxes, you know, on the fossil fuel companies, and then he's going to reinvest it. I do want to question that anyway, because under all these windfall taxes and all the taxes we do on fossil fuels, we re-gift it all back to them in tax rebates, which can go over 100% when they're drilling for oil in the North Sea. So in actual fact, I am really unsure if any of that money coming from the fossil fuel companies could ever be reapplied in this way. I don't think it could be.
OK, I mean, Labour say that they want to do away with some of those tax incentives, but again, we are talking here about something that the finer details of it, like this detail, which again is another important aspect to this. Are they going to be, and this, I don't expect you to know the answer to this, my point is that I don't think anybody does, right? Are they going to be buying existing assets from private sector operators? So are we going to be paying for things that already exist, OK? Or are we going to be paying for Labour to build things from scratch or co-invest in new projects? Because only those last two things would actually add to our energy generation and storage capacity. If we're just buying things that already exist and we just own things, but we've still got the same level of everything.
Completely agree with you. I think it should be coming from these last two. I actually think that's the direction. I think also it's the sectors it's going into. So we're talking about renewable energy, but we've only been talking really about wind in their discussions. But what about wave and tide? We've got massive potential in that, which we have squandered. We're using something like 0.001% of our tidal capacity at the moment. We should be putting seed money and big seed money into that to get it going. Then we wouldn't have to have these discussions about the lights going off and everything when we switch to wind and solar. I mean, our tide capacity is 20 gigawatts. And as you and I sit here today, we're using about 28 gigawatts.
Right.
Probably around half of that, a bit under, is probably coming from renewables. And we're importing a whole load of it on interconnectors. If we had 20 gigawatts of tide out there, we'd be exporting. It would be an export industry. It would be turning our trade deficit into a trade surplus, and Britain would be making money.
So look, from what you know of Great British Energy so far, which is what everyone knows, I dare say possibly a bit more than what everyone knows, this is your bag, you are into this stuff, you know. Well, how would you rate this out of 10, really? And not just in terms of, I know you want to go very far with the climate, that's exactly what I would expect, but just in terms of something, in terms of how it's thought through, cost effectiveness, you know, communication, etc.
Good idea generally. Absolutely got to go ahead and do it. Right area. We've got to be investing in all of these new things, and much heavier than this. Communication, appalling. I mean, really delivered to the British public in a terrible way. The optic, as we talked about, was awful. And it's not communicated really in the way that says to people, look, we're going to make money out of this. It's not just about saving a bit on our bills. It's not just about energy security. We get in and do this in energy, and we do it 10, 20 years before other countries. We're going to make money. All the tech we're creating, we can export. All of the energy we can export when we get there, if we do it all properly. There's lots of upsides putting money back in the pocket.
That implies they don't quite know the answer to all those questions yet, I think, doesn't it?
I think they are tippy-toeing around like they are on a lot of issues, and they're not going at it full hog. And when you're so far ahead in those election polls, you should just be going for it.
OK, all right.